Hello everyone! We've discussed our share of movies so far on this channel, including the fantastically epic yet historically inaccurate movie 300, as well as a movie that's both epic and accurate in Gettysburg. But today I want to talk about a movie that's truly one of my all-time favorites. I'm of course referring to the 1987 cult classic on the Vietnam War, Full Metal Jacket. It's rare for me to have a movie where I can recite most of the lines from memory, but that is the case with this Stanley Kubrick modern art masterpiece. What starts out as a brutal drill sergeant turning his maggots into Marines transforms into a movie about the brutality of life as a soldier, and plenty of psychological analysis has been done on this movie as it explores the themes of people losing their individuality during boot camp, and in the case of Joker during the war itself, the duality of man.
I think I was trying to suggest something about the duality of man, sir.
The what?
The duality of man, the Jungian thing, sir.
But I'm not here to be Sigmund Freud because psychology isn't my field. I'm here to analyze Full Metal Jacket with 7 historical themes I've noticed. So without further ado, let's get started. Theme number 1 is Hartman the Hard Man. One of the first things you'll notice about this movie is the brutality of its drill instructor, Gunnery Sergeant Hartman. Portrayed by an actual Marine Corps veteran in R. Lee Ermey, Gunny makes it clear right away what a hard-ass he is. He gives his soldiers demeaning nicknames and has a particular disgust for one recruit in particular, Leonard Lawrence. He gives him the nickname Private Pile, named after the dopey Gomer Pyle character from a famous 1960s sitcom. Now, this unintelligent, overweight soldier can't help but crack a grin at Gunny's vulgar sayings, leading to some corporal punishment. Take a listen.
Now choke yourself! God damn it, with my hand, numbnuts! Don't pull my fucking hand over there. I said choke yourself. Now lean forward and choke yourself. Are you through grinning?
There, yes, sir.
Bullshit, I can't hear you.
There, yes, sir.
Bullshit, I still can't hear you. Sounds off like you've got a pair.
Sir, yes, sir.
That's enough. Get on your feet.
But he wasn't the only one subject to Gunny's physical punishments. Right before this, he gave J.T. Davis the nickname Private Joker for his fooling around while the drill sergeant was talking. And for that, he got this punishment.
What have we got here? A fucking comedian, Private Joker. I admire your honesty. Hell, I like you. You can come over to my house and fuck my sister. You little scumbag. I got your name. I got your ass. You will not laugh. You will not cry. You will learn by the numbers. I will teach you. Now get up. Get on your feet.
However, the historical accuracy of how Hartman treated his soldiers has come into question. After all, the Marine Corps abolished corporal punishment in 1957, which is before U.S. involvement in Vietnam escalated. It should also be noted that R. Lee Ermey wanted to impress director Stanley Kubrick with his portrayal of Hartman, and so he ratcheted up his intensity compared to when he actually trained soldiers during the Vietnam era. People who served in the Marine Corps have discussed different experiences about whether Ermey's portrayal of a drill sergeant is accurate. Generally, they say the strict physical trainings are accurate, as well as the sort of sense of conformity that the sergeant establishes. Some had vulgar instructors and some didn't, but usually they agreed that their drill sergeants wouldn't lay a hand on you like Gunny did. Indeed, official Marine Corps policy today not only prohibits corporal punishment, but also verbal harassment, hazing, and group punishment, and I'd say there's all 3 of those throughout the rest of this boot camp scene in the movie. So yeah, especially in the year 2024, a drill sergeant like Gunnery Sergeant Hartman would be impossible to find. Theme number 2 is racial bigotry. Should be noted that the U.S. Armed Forces had only recently integrated in 1948 under President Harry Truman, so maybe only about 15 to 20 years before this movie took place. So the soldiers and the drill sergeant in this movie may have had some rather racist attitudes. Now, Gunnery Sergeant Hartman said there was no racial bigotry in his beloved Corps, but then immediately went on to say this.
I do not look down on niggers, kites, wops, or greasers. Here you are all equally worthless.
He then proceeded to name his first soldier he picked on Private Snowball, and indeed that was a black soldier he gave that name. The Marine Corps was a true American melting pot experience for many of the soldiers in this movie. The Vietnam era took place just after the civil rights movement had seen its gains, so you could imagine many of the soldiers probably grew up in segregated hometowns. So seeing people who look different from you, the kind of people you maybe haven't seen your whole life, may have just instinctually led to some fear and/or reservations. Now, when it comes to the soldiers' attitudes on race, this is more evident when the movie transitions to war. Interestingly, Private Cowboy, the soldier so named because he's from Texas, wears a Confederate flag with Lubbock rock legend Buddy Holly on his helmet. But a Confederate flag worn by a Southerner in the 1960s, that's hardly the most racist thing that goes on. But the soldiers, they repeatedly call the native Asian population just about every slur under the sun, gook, slant eye, etc. This to me is just an extension of the racist language used during World War II to refer to the enemy, as the Japanese were dehumanized in everyday talk with people and newspapers simply referring to them as the Japs. But circling back to racism towards black people, if you thought what Gunny or Private Cowboy had to say maybe was racist, just listen to what old Animal Mother has to say.
Hey, Jungle Bunny. Thank God for the sickle cell, huh?
And again, that is not the worst thing he says in this movie. Our third theme is relaxed sexual norms. Now, sex does have a long history in American wars. After all, hookers are named after General Joseph Hooker's ladies he had around the camps during the US Civil War. But the sexual liberation of the 1960s saw a true relaxation in people's attitudes. Even the old hard-ass Gunnery Sergeant Hartman had to be aware of this, when telling his maggots about how their rifles would be their new girlfriends.
You will give your rifle a girl's name, because this is the only pussy you people are going to get. Your days of finger banging old Mary Jane Rottencrotch through her pretty pink panties are over.
Indeed, the first contraceptive pill had been made available for use around the year 1960, and so the soldiers would discover plenty of sexual adventures when they reached the Nam. Now again, it should be noted that prostitutes played a role in wars of the past, but it sure is interesting how this movie has not one, but two prostitution scenes, with the first one being played right after the pivotal moment where Pyle kills himself and his drill sergeant. Spoiler alert for those who haven't watched. Yes, just about 50 years ago, this is how a man would have treated a lovely lady during the World War I era.
Katie, beautiful Katie, you're the only girl that I adore.
And now take a look at how soldiers reacted to a Vietnamese prostitute that approached them.
Good morning, little schoolgirl. I'm a little schoolboy, too. What you got there, Chief?
Do you want number one, Funky?
Hey, you boys want number one, Bucky?
I'm so horny I can't even get a piece of hand.
Me want sucky.
Yes, I may be cherry-picking a bit here, but I think there was a clear shift in attitudes from just 50, maybe even 10 years ago. The women at home certainly dressed a bit less modestly by the 60s, so when you saw a prostitute roll around in Vietnam, you couldn't help but spend your $15 on her. Okay, maybe only $5.
$15 buku money. $5 each.
Come on, she love you good. Boom, boom, long time.
Theme number 4 is the cultural importance of 1960s music. Perhaps no decade of music made the indelible impact on popular culture as the 1960s did. Of course you had the British invasion with groups like the Beatles, but American musicians were making their own tremendous impact too. Now, other Vietnam War era movies like Forrest Gump make plenty of use of 60s era's music, but so does Full Metal Jacket, and I think its soundtrack has plenty of great picks. The very opening scene sucks you in as you witness all the recruits get their hair shorn off, to the tune of Hello Vietnam.
Goodbye, my darling, hello, Vietnam.
Now, this was a 1965 #1 country song by Johnny Wright and Kitty Wells. At a time where anti-war protest songs were gaining some steam, this song begrudgingly defended the war, discussing how it was necessary to stop the evils of communism. We'll talk about that more with the next theme. In any case, it sets the tone for more 60s music to be played. This includes the 1965 #1 hit Wooly Bully by Sam the Sham and the Pharaohs, which can be heard in the background when Private Joker says this immortal line.
Well, Pilgrim, only after ya eat the peanuts out of my shit.
Another goofy rock novelty is picked for a battle scene, in this case 1963's Surfin' Bird by the Trashmen. Take a listen to how the song is introduced here.
Oh, well, everybody's heard about the bird. Bird, bird, bird. The bird's a winner. Well, a bird, bird, bird. Bird is a winner. Well, a bird, bird, bird. Well, a bird is a winner. Well, a bird, bird, bird. The bird's a winner. Well, a bird, bird, bird. Well, a bird is a winner.
There's perhaps a sense of irony that Kubrick was going for when he contrasts the happy-go-lucky songs of the 60s with the brutality of the war. Another example of this irony is when a happy song about getting married, the 1964 #1 hit Chapel of Love by the Dixie Cups, is played right before the Tet Offensive catches the troops by surprise. All the soldiers are chatting about how they've already seen combat or how they've been in the shit, all while a song about love and marriage plays in the background. And finally, we must discuss the song that plays in the credits, the excellent 1966 #1 hit by the Rolling Stones, Paint It Black. With this song's association with counterculture and played right after the tense ending to the film, it is made pretty clear by the end that Full Metal Jacket is an anti-war movie. Theme number 5 is Cold War tension. Now, the Vietnam War took place largely as a proxy war during the Cold War between the United States and Soviet Union. It was fought at first just between communist North Vietnam and capitalist South Vietnam, but other countries got involved with it because they wanted their system spread around the world and not their enemies. The US saw this as the policy of containment, or aiming to prevent the spread of communism beyond its original Cold War borders. Another key term you may remember from a history class is the domino theory, which basically stated that if South Vietnam fell to communism, it would have a domino effect wherein other countries around the region would fall to the Reds. So, US involvement was thought of as justified. Gunnery Sergeant Hartman in particular made it clear what this war was about in a speech to his soldiers on Christmas Day.
Today is Christmas. There will be a magic show at 0930. Chaplain Charlie will tell you about how the free world will conquer communism with the aid of God and a few Marines.
So, there was a clear contrast between the God-loving capitalists and the heathen communists in North Vietnam. But how much did the soldiers themselves really believe in the cause they were fighting for? The answer is not very much. As is often the case in the history of war, they fought more for their brothers in arms next to them than whatever the government may be telling them. I mean, listen to Private Cowboy be interviewed for his thoughts on the war.
I hate Vietnam. There's not one horse in this whole country. They don't have one horse in Vietnam. There's something basically wrong with that.
There was a clear sense of bitterness that South Vietnam themselves were not holding up their end of the bargain in this fight. And as for the idea that the Americans were freedom fighters battling against communism, maybe Animal Mother puts that notion to rest with this memorable line.
Well, at least they died for a good cause.
What cause was that?
Freedom?
Flush out your hit, you new guy. You think we waste scoops for freedom? This is a slaughter. If I'm gonna get my balls blown off for a word, my word is poontang.
Our theme number 6 is the portrayal of the Tet Offensive. We discussed how, right before the Tet Offensive, The soldiers of this movie were chatting in their tent who's seen combat, who hasn't, etc. But they're all about to see combat when an alarm goes off and they're surprised by the Viet Cong. Some discussion happened earlier in the movie. Hey officer, there's a rumor going around that the Viet Cong are planning an attack on the Tet lunar holiday. But it was generally dismissed because Tet is a big frickin' deal in Vietnam. They wouldn't tack on their Lunar New Year, now would they?
Tet, the year of the monkey. Vietnamese Lunar New Year's Eve. Down in Dogpatch, the Gooks are shooting off fireworks to celebrate.
Well, much like the Hessians during the U.S. Revolutionary War, who were hung over the day after Christmas during the Battle of Trenton, a holiday attack was used as a surprise, but this time it was used against the U.S. Now I make that connection between the Battle of Trenton and the Tet Offensive because both were significant momentum changers in their respective wars, because catching your enemy with their pants down is a serious hurt to their morale. Now it should be noted that the particular soldiers this movie focused on didn't have it as hard as other US soldiers during the Tet Offensive. It should also be noted that at least technically, the Tet Offensive was a military victory for the US as they were eventually able to repel the attack. But it was a moral defeat for the US as people could start to see the horrors of war on their TV screens back home in the States. And that gets me to our last theme. And that's theme number 7, the war at home / Walter Cronkite. After the initial shock of the Tet Offensive, Joker comes back to hear from his officer about the public's reaction to the fighting. And it's not good.
We also have reports that a division of NVA has occupied all of the city of Hue south of the Perfume River. In strategic terms, Charlie's cut the country in half. The civilian press are about to wet their pants, and we've heard even Cronkite's going to say the war is now unwinnable. In other words, it's a huge shit sandwich, and we're all going to have to take a bite.
This was a big, hairy deal. Unlike in today's hyper-polarized political environment, in the 1960s everyone got their news from a pretty similar source. There was no MSNBC for the left or Fox News for the right. You had maybe 3 main sources of news on TV. And arguably the most trusted man in America was CBS broadcaster Walter Cronkite. He was there for the assassination of Kennedy and would later be on air to announce events like the killing of MLK, the moon landing, Watergate, and he even covered the Nuremberg trials decades before the Vietnam War. So when Americans heard from Cronkite that the war was unwinnable, they listened. And so public support for the war decreased a good bit after the Tet Offensive. It was already going down, but you can see from this Gallup chart how it continued to go down. In the interviews seen later on in the movie, you can see not just Private Cowboy, but other soldiers talk about how if they just had a little more help, they would be able to take out North Vietnam.
Well, if they send us some more guys, maybe, and bomb the hell out of the North, they might give up.
But given the morale killer that was the Tet Offensive, there wasn't the public support for the war back home. So the aftermath of the Tet Offensive is, to me, one of the most historically important parts of the movie. Well, what are your thoughts on the history / historical accuracy of Full Metal Jacket? Are there any particular scenes in this movie that stick out to you that I didn't cover? I know there's plenty with Private Pyle that I didn't cover from the whole boot camp experience, so let me know in the comments. And I'll see you with another history video, hopefully quite soon. Bye-bye!